The air in the county general emergency room waiting area was a thick, stagnant soup of anxiety and antiseptic. Fluorescent lights hummed with a weary, buzzing persistence, casting a pallid, unforgiving glow on the array of human misery scattered across the rows of bolted-down plastic chairs. It was a Tuesday night, which in any city ER meant a fresh delivery of the week's accumulated misfortunes. A child with a hacking cough, a young man with his arm in a makeshift sling, an elderly woman staring blankly at the scuffed linoleum. Each was an island of private pain, waiting for their name to be called like a lottery number for salvation. Into this tableau walked a man who seemed to absorb and amplify the room's ambient discomfort. He was built like a retired linebacker, broad in the shoulders and thick through the chest, all of it wrapped in worn, heavy leather. A cut-off vest, or a kuta, as it was known, bore the three-piece patch of a motorcycle club, a grimacing skull flanked by crossed connecting rods. The club's name, Road Brotherhood, was stitched in archaic lettering above it. Tattoos, intricate and faded with sun and time, crawled from his collar and snaked up his neck. His hands were large and calloused, one of them wrapped in a dark, greasy rag that was steadily soaking through with a patch of crimson. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried gait that was at odds with the frantic energy of the room, his worn leather boots making no sound on the floor. He came to a stop before the triage window, a plexiglass shield separating the waiting from the working. Behind it sat charge nurse Brenda Kowalski. Brenda was a 15-year veteran of this place. She was sharp, ruthlessly efficient, and possessed a bedside manner that had been sandblasted away by a decade and a half of 12-hour shifts. She saw the world in categories: sick, not so sick, and time wasters. When she looked up, her gaze swept over the leather and ink, and she made her assessment in less than a second. "Help you?" she asked, her voice clipped, devoid of any pretense of warmth. The man unwrapped the rag from his forearm. A deep, clean gash, at least 4 inches long, gaped at the flesh. Metal shavings glinted under the harsh light. "Angle grinder kickback," he said. His voice was a low rumble, calm and steady. Brenda's eyes barely flickered. She'd seen worse. She'd seen better. It was just another piece of wreckage from the day. She slid a clipboard through the slot. "Fill this out. Insurance card and ID." The man produced a worn leather wallet, placing a driver's license and a VA card on the counter. "No insurance." Brenda's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Another one." She pushed the clipboard back toward him. "Find a seat. It's going to be a while," she said, her tone dismissive. She turned her head slightly. "We're dealing with actual emergencies tonight. We'll get to your cut when we can." The emphasis on the word actual was not lost on anyone within earshot. A young couple sitting nearby, the husband in a crisp polo shirt, exchanged a look and subtly shifted their bodies away from the empty chair next to which the biker now stood. The message was clear. He was an inconvenience, a stereotype, a problem to be managed eventually. The man, whose license read Marcus Rhodes, simply nodded. He took the clipboard, found the most distant empty chair, and sat down. He didn't sigh, didn't complain, didn't show a flicker of annoyance. He began to fill out the paperwork with a steady, methodical hand, the pen looking like a twig in his grasp. He was a stone in the river of the ER's chaos, impassive and still. 20 minutes stretched into 40. The waiting room's population swelled. A car accident brought in 2 wailing teenagers. A suspected overdose was rushed through the double doors on a gurney, a frantic paramedic straddling the patient, rhythmically compressing his chest. Through it all, Rhodes sat, the bloody rag now resting in his lap, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. The crisis, when it came, started not with a bang, but with a gasp. An older man, maybe 65, who'd been sitting with his wife complaining of chest pains, suddenly slumped in his chair. His face, already ashen, turned a dusky shade of blue. His wife shrieked his name. "Frank! Frank!" Brenda and a young, terrified-looking resident were there in an instant. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" Brenda's professional mask was firmly in place, her voice sharp with command. Frank's eyes rolled back. A gurgling sound rattled in his chest. "He's not breathing," his wife wailed. "Do something." "Get him on the floor. Somebody get me a crash cart," Brenda yelled over her shoulder. The resident and a security guard helped lower the man to the ground. The waiting room, already tense, fell into a horrified, breathless silence. Everyone stared, frozen, at the sudden, stark reality of death playing out on the linoleum. The resident started clumsy chest compressions. The crash cart arrived, its wheels squealing, but the team was a skeleton crew. The main ER bays were full. The on-call cardiologist was still 20 minutes out, and the only attending physician on the floor was suturing a complicated facial lac in trauma 2. This was happening in the worst possible place, out in the open, with limited equipment and panicked junior staff. "What's his rhythm?" Brenda demanded, trying to attach the EKG leads with shaking hands. I can't get a clear reading," the resident stammered, his compressions losing their rhythm. They were losing him. The air crackled with the terrifying certainty of it. The man's wife was sobbing uncontrollably. The polo-shirted husband was shielding his wife's eyes. And then, a sound cut through the panic. The quiet, deliberate creak of old leather. Marcus Rhodes stood up. He placed the clipboard neatly on his chair and began to walk toward the unfolding disaster. He moved with the same unhurried pace as before, but now it felt different. It wasn't languor. It was purpose. "Sir, you need to stay back," the security guard barked, moving to intercept him. Rhodes didn't even look at him. His eyes were fixed on the dying man on the floor. He stopped beside Brenda, his large frame casting a shadow over the scene. "You're losing him," he said, his voice still a low, calm rumble, yet it sliced through the noise like a scalpel. Brenda looked up, her face a mask of fury and stress. "I just told you to step back. This is a medical emergency." "I know," Rhodes said, his gaze flicking from the man's cyanotic lips to the frantic bouncing of the resident's hands. "Your resident's compressions are too shallow and he's hyperventilating the patient with the ambu bag. You're driving air into his stomach, not his lungs. You're going to cause aspiration." Brenda stared, momentarily stunned into silence by the calm, clinical precision of his words. This wasn't some random bystander's panicked advice. This was an assessment. "Who the hell are you?" she finally spat out, a mix of indignation and a dawning, terrifying sliver of doubt. Rhodes finally met her eyes. The weariness in his own seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 nights just like this one. "Your patient is in ventricular fibrillation, secondary to a massive anterior ST elevation, myocardial infarction. You have less than a minute to shock him before his heart muscle dies. Now, hand me the paddles." He didn't ask, he commanded. The authority in his voice was absolute, forged not in the bravado of a bar fight, but in the crucible of life and death decisions. Brenda's mind reeled. The words V, fib, STEMI were not just terms. He used them with an intimate, effortless familiarity that she hadn't heard since her days as a student listening to the hospital's top cardiac surgeon. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. her entire professional identity warring with the undeniable competence in front of her. Then she looked down at Frank's face, at the slack jaw and lifeless pallor, and the choice was made for her. She thrust the paddles into his waiting hands. The transformation was instantaneous. The biker, the nuisance, the unwanted patient vanished. In his place stood a commander. "You," he said, pointing a tattooed finger at the resident. "Off the chest. Now." The resident scrambled back, relieved. Rhodes knelt, his knees cracking, and placed his hands on the man's sternum. He began compressions, and the difference was night and day. His movements were deep, powerful, and perfectly timed, his entire upper body working like a piston. 110 compressions per minute. Get me a 10 milliliter syringe of epinephrine and 300 milligrams of amiodarone. "You," he looked at Brenda. "Charged to 200 joules. Clear." His voice boomed through the waiting room. The staff, drawn by the commotion, moved as if on instinct, his commands overriding all other thought. Brenda charged the defibrillator. Rhodes leaned back, his hands hovering over the patient's chest. The machine whined to its peak. "Clear," he repeated, his eyes scanning to ensure no one was touching the body. He pressed the buttons. The man's body arched violently off the floor, a brutal, convulsive leap. Rhodes's eyes were immediately on the monitor. "No change. Still in VFib. Resume compressions." He was back on the chest without a pause. "Push the epi. Get ready to shock again at 360. He worked with a terrifying, serene focus. His large, tattooed hands, which had looked so brutish and clumsy before, moved with an economy and grace that was mesmerizing. He was a master craftsman at his trade, and his medium was the fragile spark of human life. He called for drugs, interpreted complex rhythms on the fly, and adjusted his approach with the fluid intelligence of someone who had done this thousands of times. He didn't just know the steps, he understood the symphony of chaos inside the man's chest. Dr. Evans, the attending physician, finally burst out of the trauma bay, drawn by the repeated calls of "clear." He skidded to a halt, taking in the impossible scene, a patched biker leading a code team in the middle of his waiting room. "What's going on?" he demanded. Rhodes didn't even look up. "Patient is a 65-year-old male. Witnessed arrest. Approximately 8 minutes of downtime. We've given 2 shocks and 1 round of epi, still in refractory VFib. I need to intubate. Get me a laryngoscope with a Mach 3 blade and a 7.5 endotracheal tube." Dr. Evans, a man used to being the ultimate authority in his ER, found himself utterly outranked. He didn't know this man, but he recognized the aura of profound, unshakable competence. He became an assistant in his own department. "Yes, sir," he said, the words leaving his mouth before he could even process them. He turned and relayed the orders. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus Rhodes orchestrated the resuscitation. He intubated the patient on the first try, a notoriously difficult procedure made to look effortless. He directed further rounds of defibrillation and antiarrhythmic drugs. Slowly, miraculously, the jagged, chaotic line of ventricular fibrillation on the monitor began to organize. A weak, thready rhythm appeared. Then another. "We have a sinus rhythm," Rhodes announced, his voice still a low calm. "Barely. Pulse is thready, but it's there. Let's get him on a dopamine drip and get him to the cath lab yesterday. He's thrown a clot in his left anterior descending artery. You unblock it, he might just live." He delivered a concise, perfect handoff to Dr. Evans, detailing every drug given, every procedure performed, every clinical observation. It was a masterclass in emergency medicine. As the team, now working with renewed purpose, prepared the patient for transport, Rhodes stood up, He took a sterile gauze pad from the cart and methodically wiped the conductive gel from his hands and forearms. The adrenaline began to fade from the room, replaced by a stunned, reverent silence. He walked back to his chair. He sat down, picked up the clipboard, and looked at it as if trying to remember what he was doing. He placed the bloody shop rag back over the gash on his arm and settled in to wait. He had saved a man's life, commanded an entire medical team, and altered the course of a dozen lives. And now he was once again just a man with a cut, waiting his turn. The whispers started almost immediately. A nurse, scrolling frantically on her phone, gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered to Brenda. "You know who that is? That's Marcus Rhodes. Dr. Marcus Rhodes. He was the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Johns Hopkins. He pioneered pediatric xenotransplantation. He literally wrote the book on aortic valve repair." The news spread through the staff in hushed, awe-filled tones. They stared at the man in the leather vest, who now seemed less like an intruder and more like a visiting deity. After the patient was gone, after the waiting room had been cleaned and the quiet hum of Tuesday night had returned, Brenda Kowalski walked over to Rhodes. Her face was pale, her usual hardened expression completely gone, replaced by a profound and humbling shame. She stood before him, unable to speak for a long moment. We need your statement. For the chart," she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. Rhodes looked up from the floor. His eyes were clear, holding no judgment, no, "I told you so." "There's nothing to report," he said. ER staff responded to a code in the waiting room. Successful resuscitation. That's the whole story. He was giving them the credit. He was erasing himself from the record. Brenda swallowed hard. "Your arm," she said, gesturing to the now bleeding gash. Let me get you into a room right now. A doctor can see you immediately. I am so sorry for before, for how I treated you." This was it. The moment of reckoning. Rhodes looked down at his own injury, a triviality in the grand scheme of the last hour. Then he looked back up at her, a deep and abiding weariness in his gaze. He gave her back her own words, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. "It's just a cut," he said softly. "You had actual emergencies to deal with." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. In that single sentence, Brenda saw the entirety of her prejudice, her arrogance, her failure. She saw the man she had dismissed and the man he truly was. Rhodes slowly pushed himself to his feet. The leather creaked, a sound that now seemed respectful, dignified. He settled the cuda on his shoulders and looked toward the exit. "I think I'll find an urgent care down the road," he said. "You all look like you have your hands full tonight." He turned and walked away. He didn't wait for a thank you, didn't seek a word of praise. He moved through the automatic doors, which hissed open to welcome him, and then shut just as quickly behind him, leaving charge nurse Brenda Kowalski standing alone in the middle of the waiting room, forever changed by the quiet lesson delivered by the man she had judged, dismissed, and then, ultimately, been saved by.